"We don't want you here this year," my mother said flatly, standing at the doorway like I was a stranger selling magazines. Snow clung to the collar of my coat as I stood there blinking at her, not quite believing she'd actually said it. But then again, I should have known better. The signs had been there for years. Quiet, omissions, last-minute plan. Changes the way group texts mysteriously forgot to include me. Still, I kept showing up, arms full of gifts and heart full of hope, like some idiot clinging to an expired family membership card. This time, I had wrapped the presents myself. Simple things, but thoughtful. A silk scarf for Mom in her favorite teal, a first edition book for Julia that I found at an estate sale, and a toolbox set for Brandon, even though he'd flaked on every holiday for the past 3 years. I'd imagined handing them out in the living room, maybe sipping cocoa while the fire popped, letting the illusion of normalcy stretch just a little longer. But that illusion died the second she opened the door and gave me that look. No warmth, no confusion, just a hard finality that slammed into my chest like ice water. Behind her, laughter spilled out from the living room. Julia's high-pitched cackle, someone popping a champagne bottle, the rustle of wrapping paper already being torn. They'd started without me. I stood frozen, arms heavy with the weight of things never said. I brought gifts. I offered like that might soften her. I nodded toward the bag in my hand, half expecting her to step aside. She didn't move. From behind her, Julia appeared in her ridiculous glittery dress, holding a flute of something pink. "Christmas isn't for losers," she sang like it was a jingle, and then turned away laughing. The bag slipped from my hand onto the porch. I didn't even flinch when the wine bottle inside clinked against the step. Mom just glanced down at it, then turned back inside without a word. The door closed with a soft, expensive click. I stood there until the cold numbed my fingers. A neighbor across the street peeked through her blinds. Another one was stringing lights on his fence but kept looking over, pretending not to watch me get exiled in real time. I knelt and placed the bag upright against the door, then walked to my car parked just down the street. The snow had started to gather on the windshield, coating the glass like sugar on a forgotten pastry. I opened the driver's side door and slid in the leather seat, squeaking under my soaked coat. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I stared straight ahead, watching the lights inside flicker behind the curtains. For a moment, I imagined Julia opening the scarf and pretending to hate it only to keep it anyway. I imagined Mom reading the card I'd written 6 lines about forgiveness and fresh starts and scoffing. And Brandon wouldn't show, but the gift would get claimed all the same. Then I saw it. Through the window, my scarf draped over Julia's shoulders as she mimicked me making some exaggerated gesture. Mom laughed. Laughed. Like the joke was on me. And maybe it was. My fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel. My ears rang with the emptiness of the car and the fullness of the house behind me. A deep crack formed somewhere in my chest, quiet but permanent, like the snap of a frozen branch under too much weight. I put the key in the ignition but didn't start the engine. I just stared into the windshield and something broke free in me. They didn't erase me tonight, they've been doing it for years. I just didn't see it until now. Back in my apartment, I stood in the dim yellow glow of the kitchen jacket, still on, snow melting down my sleeves, soaking into the floor. I didn't have the energy to take it off. The silence in my place was thick but clean. No laughter, no sarcasm, no passive-aggressive sighs. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft buzz of the heater kicking on. I peeled off my wet coat and draped it over the back of a chair, then sat down at my small desk near the window. The streetlight outside blinked steadily like a heartbeat. I reached for a legal pad half filled with grocery lists and utility reminders and flipped it over to a clean page. My pen hovered but nothing came. My head was still too loud. I leaned back and closed my eyes, and that's when the memories started to flicker. Brandon. He used to call every few months, always with that falsely casual tone. "Hey man, quick question, do you have a minute?" It never took just a minute. The first time it was to help float his food truck idea. I gave him 5 grand. He promised 10% back within a year. I never saw a dime or the food truck. The second time he needed help getting out of a bad lease, I signed my name as a guarantor. He stopped paying after 3 months. I covered the rest and never mentioned it. Then Julia. After her divorce, she had nowhere to go. She cried on my couch for 3 days before asking if I could cover the down payment on a rental. Just a short-term thing, she said. I wired her 2 months' rent plus security. I didn't even get a thank you card. Mom needed help covering Dad's funeral expenses. I covered the difference between the church's base package and the one she wanted, the one with the mahogany casket and dove release. Your father would have wanted this, she told me. And I believed her. I always did. Even when she started acting like that contribution was the least I could do. But none of that mattered when they looked at me. All they saw was the guy who never quite made it. No wife, no kids, no big title to flash around at Christmas. Just Ethan, the guy who showed up when things went sideways. A glorified safety net. I stood up and walked to my bookshelf, pulling down a shoebox full of old letters and receipts. I don't know why I'd kept them all these years. Maybe a part of me had always been preparing for this moment. Inside, I found an old email printout one Brandon had sent years ago when he was scrambling after a failed venture. I'd helped him restructure his debts, even connected him to a friend who was an accountant. I unfolded the page slowly. His words hit differently now. At least we've got Ethan. He's always a good fallback if things go south again. Fallback. I stared at the word until it blurred. Not brother, not partner, not support. Fallback. Like an emergency fund no one wants to acknowledge, but everyone expects to be there. A dull ache started behind my eyes, not from sadness, from clarity. I put the paper down and went back to my desk. My laptop screen glowed softly in the dark. I opened a new document and stared at the blank page. Then without hesitation I typed, Operation Vanish. I leaned back and stared at it. The words looked sterile, clinical, perfect. I smiled for the first time in years. I didn't go looking for revenge. I went looking for peace, and found an accomplice. The bookstore smelled like cinnamon and old paper, one of those tucked-away shops wedged between a coffee house and a tax prep office. The week after Christmas was always slow, and I liked it that way. I came to browse, not to speak. I needed the quiet, needed the kind of silence that didn't feel like rejection. I was flipping through a worn copy of The Art of War when a voice behind me said, "You know, he used to quote that book like scripture." Always skipped the parts about integrity, though. I turned slowly. Vanessa. I hadn't seen her since Brandon's wedding. Even then we hadn't spoken. She'd looked elegant, reserved, quietly furious in a way no one else seemed to notice. Back then, Brandon had painted her as unstable. He warned me to stay away, said she was manipulative, dramatic. I believed him. Or maybe I didn't think enough to question it. Vanessa, I said cautiously. She raised an eyebrow as if to ask whether that was all I could manage. You look like someone who just realized Santa's not real, she said, then softened. Sorry. That was mean. No, it's fair, I replied. I've had a week. She motioned toward the chairs near the shop's tiny fireplace. Want to sit? We settled into 2 mismatched armchairs, steam rising from the tea she'd already been nursing. The light from the window cut through her hair, but her eyes stayed sharp, unreadable. I saw you outside your mom's place on Christmas Eve, she said after a beat. Didn't want to intrude. I blinked. You were there. Picking up Sophie? Brandon was late again. Her tone was clipped. He told her you were in rehab. I laughed, but it came out dry and bitter. Figures. She studied me for a moment. I don't think you're crazy, Ethan. I hadn't said I was. Vanessa leaned down and pulled a canvas tote from under her chair. She unzipped it and slid a folder onto the table between us. I kept this, she said, just in case he ever came after me again. Inside were printouts, bank statements, court transcripts, screenshots of emails from fake aliases, offshore transfers labeled as consulting fees. I picked up one of the statements. The numbers blurred slightly, but not from confusion, from recognition. I told him I didn't want to be part of anything shady, she said. The next week, he locked me out of our joint accounts and filed for full custody, said I was emotionally erratic. I swallowed. And the courts believed him. He's charming, she said flatly, and he underestimates quiet people. Something shifted then, between us. Not warmth, not alliance yet, but recognition. She wasn't a mess, she was meticulous. Every line in that folder, every screenshot, this wasn't the work of someone unraveling. It was the work of someone preparing. I sat back. Why show this to me? Because I think you remember things no one else is willing to say out loud, she said. And because, if he underestimated me, I bet he underestimated you too. I didn't answer. Not right away. Outside snow had started to fall again. I looked down at the folder, its edges worn, tabs labeled by date. I hadn't come here for anything. Not answers, not plans. But now this felt like more than coincidence, like a door cracking open in the dark. I took the folder home. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't crazy for remembering things no one else would say out loud. Brandon didn't just erase me emotionally. He'd started erasing me legally, too. I was never sentimental about the house. It was just wood and drywall, a modest split level in a suburb that aged poorly like an overripe fruit trying to look fresh. But I remembered the weight of the pen in my hand when I co-signed the refinance papers for Brandon, and the quiet nod our father gave me afterward. No, thank you. Just a nod. That was enough for me back then. Now I stood in the county recorder's office, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. The walls were lined with beige and everything smelled of toner and dust. A clerk in her 20s, barely looking up from her screen, printed out the property history I'd requested. I told her I was verifying records for a family estate matter. She didn't care either way. The stack of papers she handed me felt heavier than it should have. I moved to one of the corner tables and started scanning. Every line was familiar until one wasn't. A quitclaim deed. Filed 2 months after Dad died. No notification, no conversation. Just a quiet, legal sleight of hand that removed my name from the title. The witness field was empty, the notary section incomplete. But the signature, my signature, was there. Only I hadn't signed anything. I stared at the page, heart beating slow but hard. The date was off. The formatting was strange. My last name was scrawled in a way I hadn't written it since college. It was like seeing your own face in a dream, familiar, but wrong. I pulled out my phone and compared it to an old lease I had saved in my photos, one I had signed. The slant was different. The spacing. Dad's voice echoed from years ago, sharp and low. Keep copies of everything. People forget what they owe until you show them the paper. He'd said it after loaning a friend $5,000 and getting ghosted. I remembered watching him open his filing cabinet, extracting the IOU with a quiet satisfaction. The friend paid up the next day. That night, back at my apartment, I spread the papers out on my dining table, cleared of its usual coffee mug and unopened mail. I pulled up my laptop, opened a spreadsheet, and started a timeline. Loan dates, emails, transfers, signatures. Everything I could remember went into cells and color-coded tabs. It wasn't about catching him now, it was about building the case. I made a fresh cup of coffee and clicked open the county's digital archive system. My name was gone from the house. The one I had saved Brandon from foreclosure on. The same house he later used as collateral for another failed venture. Yet there I was, on the hook financially for years until it mysteriously got resolved. Now I knew how. I compared PDFs, zoomed into metadata, and found the smoking gun. The deed had been digitally filed using a public notary's license, except that notary had retired 5 years earlier. The document had been modified, re-uploaded, and time-stamped in a way that only someone familiar with digital forgery would dare attempt. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew what forgery meant. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was criminal. I printed the form. The paper slid out slowly each inch, feeding a deeper silence into the room. I looked at the page and whispered, "This is where he made his first mistake." I didn't want to burn them down. I just wanted my name back. But fire once lit doesn't ask for permission. The cafe sat 2 blocks from the courthouse, wedged between a pawn shop and a discount clothing store. It was the kind of place people met when they didn't want to be seen talking. No holiday lights, no music, just the low murmur of conversations and the scent of burnt espresso. Perfect. Josh arrived late, his coat still dusted with salt from the sidewalk. He gave me a quick nod before sliding into the booth opposite mine. "You look like hell," he said, tugging off his gloves. "Good hell, though. The kind that's seen something. I brought you something?" I replied, handing him the manila folder first. "There's more on this USB, but the hard copies help connect the dots." Josh flipped through the pages, his face still at first, then slowly tightening. His fingers paused on the quitclaim deed, then the bank statement, then the printed email from Brandon's alias account. He let out a long, low whistle. "Well, damn," he muttered. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate, calculated. I know." "And you're sure you didn't authorize this signature?" he asked, tapping the deed. "I'm sure." Josh leaned back, exhaling. "This is forgery, Ethan. Wire fraud, too, depending on how that offshore transfer played into joint assets. There's a case here, but it's not small and it's not clean. That's why I came to you." He gave a soft chuckle. "You always did have the worst timing. You know I bill by the hour now, right?" I smiled, but my jaw stayed tight. "I'm not asking for free representation. I just need to know how to move smart." He sobered. "Then here's my advice. First, back up everything you've got. Twice. Offline. No cloud storage, no Gmail drafts. Encrypted USB offsite if possible. Second, don't confront him yet. The moment Brandon senses you're not curled in a corner, he's going to switch tactics. You need to be unshakable before that." "I'm working with someone," I added. "Vanessa." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "The ex-wife. She kept receipts. A lot of them." Josh nodded, impressed. "She'll be useful. But be careful. Shared pain doesn't always mean shared strategy." As we talked, I handed him more files. I told him everything about the Christmas Eve rejection, the years of silence, the small betrayals that added up to this final shove. Josh listened without judgment. That was why I trusted him. My phone buzzed and I glanced down. Vanessa found a second alias he used. "Want me to send it now, or wait?" I typed back. "Hold for now. Meeting with legal." Then to Josh. "She's been digging on her own." He looked impressed again. "You've got a good team shaping up." "Accidentally," I said. "I didn't go looking for anyone. They found me after I stopped hiding." He tapped the table once. "There's something else you need to decide now before we file anything." "What's that?" "If this goes public, if your family knows you don't get to go back? No soft reunions? No apologies over turkey dinners?" "I'm not expecting that." "You used to," he said gently. "That part of you hoping they'll eventually see you? It's the most dangerous piece right now. You have to kill it." I said nothing. The silence between us filled with the weight of my past self, who I'd been, who I was willing to become. Later that night, I drove across town to an old storage unit I still kept under a different name, left over from a brief side business that never got off the ground. I'd nearly forgotten I still had the key. Inside, I cleared a corner and tucked 2 encrypted USB drives into a waterproof case, then locked it inside a metal filing cabinet bolted to the floor. It wasn't Fort Knox, but it would slow anyone down. I didn't feel fear. Not anymore. Only momentum. I locked the unit, stood in the cold air a moment longer, then called Josh. He picked up on the second ring. "It's done," I said. Everything's backed up and secured. There was a pause. Then his voice measured serious. Are you ready for what happens when they realize you're not losing anymore? I looked up at the sky-gray clouds stretching over the streetlight's glow and said, I hope they're not. People think betrayal is loud. It's not. It's a signature filed at 2:14 a.m. The glow of the dual monitors lit my apartment in soft blue hues. Rain tapped against the window like cautious fingers as if the night itself was trying to warn me. I hadn't left the house in 2 days. Coffee mugs surrounded my desk like a small army of fatigue. But I was awake, more awake than I'd felt in years. I opened the encrypted folder Josh helped me set up and began sorting what I had into categories: financial fraud, forged documents, hidden assets. Each tab in the spreadsheet became its own rabbit hole. Every click unearthed something that stung a little more. Brandon had always mocked my need to archive everything, accusing me of being obsessive. But now those backups, dozens of them hidden across redundant drives and offline caches, had become my survival kit. And tonight, I was putting them to use. An old shared Google Drive pinged open. It was one Brandon had used for our dad's estate settlement years ago. Stupidly, he never deactivated my access. That, or he forgot I was still buried somewhere in the Permissions tab. Either way, I used it. I installed discrete logging software, nothing fancy, just enough to track changes and file activity. I wasn't trying to spy. I was creating a legal timeline. If Brandon realized I was building a case, he'd start covering his tracks. My job was to make sure he couldn't. The first ping came at 1:03 a.m. A document labeled W9 adjusted.pdf was uploaded, then replaced twice within 3 minutes. I clicked into the version history. The original file had included both Julia's and Brandon's names as payees from a dissolved LLC that was supposedly created to handle tax preparation services for small businesses. Only the LLC never did business. No invoices, no client lists, just deposits from a family trust account. And the amounts didn't match any of the tax forms Dad had prepared before his death. Vanessa's voice rang in my ear from our call earlier. He used me like a financial smokescreen. There were accounts I never even saw. I tapped her number. She answered immediately. You're up late. So are you. Find something, I think, so I said. There's a paper trail connecting Brandon to an entity that funneled money from the estate into something that eventually landed in Julia's divorce settlement. She might not even know. Of course she doesn't, Vanessa said bitterly. He always weaponized her oblivion. I need you to confirm if this name ever came up when you were married. A company called Blue North Services. There was a pause. Yeah, she said. That's the one he told me was his backup plan if everything went south. He said it was dormant. Not anymore. She exhaled sharply. Just don't get cocky, Ethan. He's slippery when he's scared. I'm not cocky. I'm calculating. I hung up and wrote Josh a detailed summary of what I found, attaching screenshots and metadata logs. I encrypted the email and triple-checked my VPN before hitting send. Then I dug into a second folder Brandon tried to delete from the drive just before midnight. I'd intercepted it thanks to the logging script. It was labeled innocuously Form 8844 Estate. But when I opened it, I saw the truth. It was a beneficiary allocation form altered. My share, once listed as 33%, had been blanked out, and the version metadata showed the changes made 5 days before Dad's funeral. Buried in the same folder was a second form marked as final copy, sent only to the estate attorney. In that version, Brandon and Julia had each claimed 50%. No mention of me. The dates were damning, the edits were deliberate, and the silence around them had been deafening. I saved everything to the secure backup drives and uploaded an encrypted copy to my offsite location. My hands trembled not from fear, but the weight of clarity. I scrolled back through the document one more time. The routing numbers linked to accounts in Julia's name, ones she probably thought were part of her alimony, not a decades-old theft. I stared at the screen. They didn't just steal my name. They've been laundering their guilt through it. The first punch I threw didn't land on Brandon, it landed in his shadow. It started with a form. Government Issue 394T, a digital submission field buried deep in the Department of Revenue's anonymous tip line. No login required. No name fields. Just boxes. Description of suspected fraud. Involved parties supporting documentation. I filled them all methodically. I uploaded redacted files, just enough to draw interest, not enough to trace back to me. A single mouse click sent it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling fan above me, spinning slowly like time marking a countdown. Vanessa had warned me once I moved from defense to offense, there'd be no stepping back. "You sure you want to start this?" she'd asked the night before over the phone. "No," I admitted. "But I have to." A week passed with silence. But silence, when you're watching closely, always has a sound. It came through Brandon's social media first. His usual overconfident posts had vanished, replaced with a carefully curated image. Family brunches, motivational quotes, and one odd snapshot. His home office cluttered with folders and a caption that read, "Audit week sucks." Josh called just after I saw it. "You see this?" he asked, voice clipped. I did. He's bluffing. That caption's a feeler, he's testing who reacts. Let him. Still, I couldn't help but notice the change. Brandon's normally public calendar disappeared. His LinkedIn activity stalled. Even his responses to Julia's comments, once laced with smug emojis, had gone dry and formal. Something had hit. Maybe not a full punch to the face, but a gust of cold air under the door. Then came the phone traffic. Late one night, while syncing my encrypted email logs, I saw the first call from a private number, then another. 3 in 2 hours. I didn't answer. But they left no voicemails, and that silence carried weight. Brandon didn't ask questions directly. He pushed others to ask for him. So I gave them something to chew on. I composed an email from a throwaway account. I knew Julia still checked, one we'd used years ago to coordinate holiday plans when Dad was sick. I kept it simple. Subject: misplaced documents. The body read, "Was cleaning up some old files and saw your name pop up with some odd financial overlaps. Blue North Services Trust. This is just a coincidence. Thought you should know." No signature, no follow-up. The bait was cast. It took 12 hours. Julia's name flashed on my phone around noon. I stared at the screen for a second longer than I should have, then answered. "Ethan," she sounded breathless. "What are you doing? Hello to you too." "Don't play coy. Brandon's freaking out. He said someone tipped off the IRS or something. He's tearing through old boxes, calling lawyers." "Did you do something?" I let a pause stretch like a rubber band pulled tight. "You think I'd know how to do that? Come on. You're the only one who keeps stuff like this. I haven't talked to Brandon in months." "Well, he's panicking. He said this could blow everything if someone connects it back to the estate." There it was. She'd confirmed it herself. There was something to blow. I smiled into the silence. Maybe someone should have been more careful. "Ethan, please, whatever this is, just stop. You're going to ruin the family." "It was already ruined. You just didn't notice." I hung up the phone and whispered, "Good. Let it blow." I didn't expect Julia to come knocking, especially not crying. She stood on the other side of my apartment door, bundled in a coat too thin for the cold mascara smudged at the edges, like she hadn't expected to end up in tears. I opened the door slowly, unsure whether to speak or just let her in. The wind behind her whipped a strand of hair across her cheek, and for a second, she looked like we were 12 again, sneaking into the attic to escape one of Mom's icy silences. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. I stepped aside. "You always know where to go. You just don't like showing up unless someone's bleeding." She walked in anyway, clutching her purse like it held answers. She didn't sit, just stood in the middle of my small living room surrounded by stacks of old books and the faint hum of the space heater near the window. "Brandon's losing it," she said after a beat. "Ever since the audit started, he's been calling me nonstop. Now the IRS wants to talk to me." Me. I didn't respond. She continued. "He asked me to sign some paperwork a while back, something about streamlining assets. I didn't know what it was. I didn't ask." "You know how he gets when you ask." "You mean loud," I said. "Condescending. Manipulative." Her lips tightened. "He said it was for tax efficiency. Now I'm attached to a trust account I didn't know existed. There's some Cayman address on it." Vanessa's voice rang in my head like a warning bell. "That family feeds on your silence." I'd ignored it before. I wasn't planning to do that again. "What do you want from me, Julia?" I asked quietly. She finally sat down, hands trembling as she fished something from her coat. "I need to know if you're behind this." "What if I was?" She looked up red-eyed. "Then, thank you. And also screw you." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm scared, Ethan," she said. "But not just because of the audit. I'm scared because Mom told me to keep quiet. Again. Like always." She said, "Don't stir the pot, don't make things worse." But I think no, I know they've been keeping things from us. From me. And maybe from each other too. She unfolded a crumpled envelope and laid it on my coffee table like a confession. "I found this in one of Brandon's office boxes. He told me he shredded everything from Dad's estate. But he missed this." I picked it up carefully, flattening the paper along its deep creases. The envelope was stained at one edge, coffee maybe, and torn along the top, but the seal still clung to the flap like it had refused to be erased completely. Inside was a copy of our father's will. Not the version filed with the county after his death, the one Brandon had emailed the family saying it reflected Dad's final wishes. No. This was dated 6 months earlier, and in it, I was named executor. My name appeared 3 separate times, once in bold, once in his careful looping signature. I felt the room tilt slightly as the weight of the paper pressed into my fingers. "If this is real," I said, voice low, "they've been lying to all of us for years." Julia nodded, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to believe anymore. I didn't come here to beg or blame. I came because I needed someone to tell me I'm not crazy. You're not." She looked down at her hands. "I'm tired, Ethan. Tired of pretending we're a normal family. We're not," I said. "We never were." Silence fell again, heavy but less sharp this time. Julia wasn't a villain. Not today. She was a casualty waking up mid-collapse. Maybe she'd go back to defending them tomorrow. Maybe she'd implode. But for now, she'd handed me a missing piece, and with it, a crack in the story Brandon had built. I took the envelope to my desk and scanned it under the soft lamplight. Then I made 3 copies. One for Josh. One for the encrypted drive. And one I'd keep with me. Behind me, Julia whispered, "What?" Now I didn't turn around. Now we stop waiting for truth to show up. We go drag it into the light. When cornered, people don't confess. They claw. The email arrived just after I'd sat down with my first coffee of the day. It was from HR, subject line, plain content, clinical. "Please come to conference room C at 9:15 a.m. No further explanation. No warmth. My stomach dropped, but my expression stayed neutral. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, stood and made my way across the floor, passing coworkers who didn't look up though. I sensed their eyes when I passed. The way people sense a tremor and pretend not to feel it. Conference room C was half lit. Tanya from HR was already there, her posture brittle behind a silver laptop. She smiled with the corners of her mouth but not her eyes. "Morning, Ethan. Please sit." I did. She cleared her throat, scrolling through something I couldn't see. "We've received an anonymous tip. A few, actually." I waited. There were allegations of financial misconduct tied to your name. Also, a possible breach of internal policy concerning record retention and access levels. I kept my voice calm. Allegations by whom they didn't name themselves. Of course. She hesitated. This might be nothing. But legal requires us to follow protocol. It's temporarily suspended your database access pending review. I nodded slowly. May I ask if these allegations came with documentation? Some screenshots? They looked unusual. I almost laughed. Brandon had gone for the obvious play, muddy the water, question the source. If he couldn't stop the truth, he'd try to stain it. Back at my desk, my login failed just as Tanya said it would. I opened my personal email instead. 4 messages. 1 from Josh, 2 from a financial institution I didn't recognize, and 1 from my bank. The subject line, urgent account access suspended due to irregular activity. That one I opened immediately. Suspicious logins, foreign IPs. As a precaution, the system had frozen my checking account. I stared at the red locked banner, breathing evenly even as something low in my chest coiled tight. I forwarded it all to Josh with the subject Brandon's fingerprints. His reply came 5 minutes later. Working theory, he's using a private investigator, possibly ex-law enforcement. Vanessa's digging. I called her. She answered on the first ring. Ethan, we saw this coming. I warned you he wouldn't play fair. He's sloppy, I said. He's scared, she corrected. That's worse. I leaned back in my chair, the office around me a dull hum. Josh said we're close to tying him to the shell companies. He's cross-checking ownership on Blue North Services and that LLC linked to the estate transfer. He'll have something soon. Just hold your ground. I'm fine. I said, though, I wasn't. Not fully. By evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was voicemail. The number was blocked. I pressed play. At first static, then a voice I knew too well. You want war, little brother? You got it. Brandon's voice smug, sharp with venom. You think you're smart. But you're always the one cleaning up messes, not making them. You're not built for this. You never were. I let the message play to the end, then tapped delete. Good, I whispered. Now he's sloppy. Some people keep their secrets in vaults. My father kept his in cassette tapes. The lock on the storage unit was cold to the touch, its surface slick from the relentless rain hammering the corrugated metal roof above. I hadn't been here in years since we packed up Dad's things after the funeral, too numb to notice what was really going where. Now I was here alone, flashlight clenched between my teeth, hands digging through brittle cardboard boxes marked in his neat all-caps handwriting. I never questioned why he kept so much analog junk, but suddenly it all felt intentional. Protective. Rain pounded harder as I hauled a cracked plastic bin onto the floor. Old tax files, blueprints from his workshop, a stack of cassettes, most unmarked, some labeled in his familiar hand. One stood out, a faded envelope taped to the top of a dusty tin box labeled simply, Estate. Final notes. I froze. Not because I thought I'd find gold, but because I could hear his voice in my head again. Never trust your memory, but always trust what you recorded. I called Josh before I opened it. I think I found something, I said. Define something. He replied, the sound of keyboard tapping in the background. A box marked final notes. There's tapes inside. There was a pause. Bring them. Or better yet, digitize first. Don't let the originals out of your sight. The first cassette clicked into the old player I found in another box. Static. Then a voice. My father's voice, older, slower, but unmistakably his. If you're listening to this, it's because I'm gone. And if I'm gone, then someone, probably Brandon, is trying to rewrite things. I sat down, legs trembling. He talked about how Brandon had always been good at persuasion but not at truth. He can manipulate your mother. He can scare Julia. But Ethan's the only one who still sees the whole board. That's why he should be executor. Not just because he's the oldest, because he's the one who won't use it to win, he'll use it to protect. There was a timestamp, dated 3 months before Dad's final will was supposedly rewritten. I digitized the recording with trembling fingers, backing it up to 3 locations before I even hit play again. Vanessa called in the middle of it. "You okay, I think?" I think he knew, I whispered. He knew Brandon would pull something, and he trusted you with the fallout. Josh confirmed the legal implications. If this holds up, it throws the entire revision Brandon pushed through into question. That's fraud on top of everything else. Will a tape hold up, I asked. Depends on context. But we're not talking about the final nail yet. We're talking about pressure. This makes your case impossible to ignore. I stared out the window of the apartment as thunder rumbled beyond the skyline. My father wasn't dramatic. He didn't leave flowery letters or speeches, but he did leave facts. Proof. He knew Brandon better than any of us, and somehow he still chose to believe I'd finish what he couldn't. I pressed rewind and played the key part again. If anything happens to me, Ethan has full authority. 10 seconds of silence followed. I knew them by heart now. Then the timestamp. I stared at the waveform on the screen. He trusted me to finish what he couldn't. "We don't want you here this year," my mother said flatly, standing at the doorway like I was a stranger selling magazines. Last Christmas, the house smelled like cinnamon and burnt marshmallows, overrun with noise, poorly tuned carols, and too many layers of obligation. This year, it smelled like bleach and absence. I'd worn the same charcoal coat from last year, still carrying the worn leather gloves I never replaced. In my hands were neatly wrapped boxes, gifts I'd spent time choosing. Nothing extravagant but thoughtful. A bottle of single malt for Dad. A journal for Julia. A cookbook Margaret once mentioned. I even brought Brandon's favorite coffee beans, though God knows why. She didn't even open the door all the way. Just enough to let her voice pierce the cold. I stood still, a stupid grin frozen on my face. Sorry she didn't blink. We're keeping things small. Just immediate family this year. The words hit like snowballs packed with stone. Behind her, warm lights flickered. Laughter floated from the living room. I could see Julia's silhouette moving, holding a wine glass. Her laugh cut through the air, sharp bright. Then she appeared, glanced at me, and rolled her eyes. "Christmas isn't for losers, Ethan." My hand tightened on the ribbon. I said nothing. I didn't ask why, didn't plead. I just placed the bags carefully at her feet. Margaret gave a forced smile like I was a delivery boy. "Thanks," she said, closing the door without another word. I stood there watching the snowflakes settle on the edges of my sleeves. The porch light buzzed overhead, flickering slightly. I didn't move for a long moment. The silence around me felt thicker than the winter air. Finally, I turned and walked back to my car. Each footstep felt like walking away from something I'd never realized I was still chasing. The car interior was cold and stale. I sat down and gripped the steering wheel, not starting the engine. Across the windshield, the world blurred, part snow, part memory. I'd done this dance for years. Showing up, hoping it would be different, telling myself it wasn't intentional, that I wasn't the only one being kept at arm's length. But tonight broke that illusion, not because of what was said, but how little it mattered to them to say it. They didn't forget me. They chose not to include me. The laughter from inside grew louder. Through the frosted window, I could see them now, Margaret opening the bottle of scotch I brought, pouring it like she earned it. Julia peeling back wrapping paper and tossing it aside. They didn't even glance outside to see if I was still there. I pressed my fingers to the glass, not to wave, just to remind myself it was real, that I was on the outside, that I always had been. It wasn't just about Christmas. It never was. They hadn't erased me tonight, they'd been doing it for years. One quiet omission at a time. No screaming matches, no dramatic scenes. Just a slow, calculated rewriting of the family narrative. One where I was the footnote, the backup, the almost. I thought of the times I covered rent for Julia when her divorce bled her dry, the weekend I drove 6 hours to bail Brandon out of a failed investment pitch, the nights I took calls from Margaret when she needed someone to just listen, and still I was the invisible one. No degree on the wall, no kids to parade, no corner office. Just a man who'd given everything and received silence in return. I reached over to the glove compartment and pulled out a pen and the small notebook I kept for grocery lists and overdue reminders. I didn't know what I meant to write, only that I needed to anchor the moment somehow before I let myself forget it like they had. The first words came shaky, then steadier. They don't see you, because they never looked. Outside, the snow kept falling. Soft, relentless, uncaring. I put the key in the ignition but didn't start the engine. I just stared into the windshield and something broke free in me. Truth doesn't always explode. Sometimes it peels back skin layer by layer. The courthouse smelled like cold metal and stress. My footsteps echoed too crisply against the polished floor, too loud in a place where people came to lose quietly. I adjusted my tie even though it wasn't crooked. Vanessa had texted me that morning. Calm eyes. Win with stillness. I tried to carry that into the courtroom like armor. Brandon was already seated, legs crossed like he owned the bench. His lawyer, a sharp-chinned man with too much gel in his hair, was whispering something rapid into his ear. Julia sat on the far end alone, wearing a beige coat that swallowed her whole. She wouldn't look at me. The judge entered with a frown that looked permanent. She didn't waste time. Let's proceed with the matter regarding contested amendments to the Frank Miller estate, she said, eyes flicking down the paperwork like she'd already read the ending and didn't like it. Brandon's lawyer opened with confidence. Your Honor, we assert that the cassette tape in question allegedly left by the decedent lacks proper chain of custody and therefore should be excluded as hearsay without credible authentication. I didn't flinch. Josh, seated beside me, simply clicked his pen. Your Honor, we anticipated this objection. I've submitted authentication reports from both a forensic audio lab and the decedent's handwriting analyst, whose signature appears on the tape's label and the envelope accompanying it. Brandon scoffed loud enough to earn a side-eye from the judge. And the envelope in question, Josh continued calm, as an anesthesiologist, contains documentation that directly contradicts the petitioner's prior sworn testimony. Brandon shot up. That envelope was destroyed. I told you they're making this up. It's fabrication, funny, Josh said, holding up the wrinkled manila envelope Julia had given me, because this looks very real to me. He handed it to the clerk. The judge raised an eyebrow as she examined the signature on the front. Mr. Brandon Miller, she said, is this your signature? Brandon shifted. It looks similar, but I don't recall. The judge cut him off. Your prior statement under oath was that this envelope had been shredded 2 years ago in a fireproof bin. Care to explain the inconsistency? His lawyer interjected. My client may have been mistaken. No, the judge snapped. He may have perjured himself. Let's test that theory. She turned to the side. Call Julia Miller to the stand. Julia stood slowly. Her eyes looked bruised, though she wore no makeup to cover them. She approached the bench like walking through fog. Miss Miller, the judge said, do you recognize this envelope? She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And did your brother Brandon ever ask you to sign documents related to the estate without full explanation? Julia looked at Brandon, then at me. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. Seconds passed like full minutes. Yes, she whispered. He told me not to read it. Just sign and stay quiet. He said it was better that way. For the family. The room fell still. Somewhere in the back, a throat cleared. I didn't turn. And this tape, the judge continued, her voice harder now. Were you aware of its existence? Julia's voice wavered. Not until recently. Our father. He always kept recordings. He trusted Ethan to follow through. The words settled like ash over Brandon's smug composure. He was frozen, caught between fury and the sinking realization that the ground beneath him had cracked. His lawyer stood abruptly, whispering harshly into Brandon's ear, hands gesturing like paddles, trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. The judge banged her gavel once. Enough for today. We'll resume Monday with full disclosure. Mr. Brandon Miller, you are advised to review your prior statements with your counsel thoroughly. Court adjourned. I stood, letting the weight of the moment press into my shoulders for just a breath before lifting my bag. Brandon looked at me as if seeing something unfamiliar, no longer the fallback, the errand boy, the invisible sibling. Julia didn't meet my eyes, but she didn't look away in shame either. It was something quieter than guilt. Maybe recognition. Outside, the air was bitingly crisp. Josh caught up with me on the steps. You realize he said you didn't just win a round, you made him bleed. I didn't want to, I replied, watching the courthouse doors close behind us. But you knew it had to be done. I nodded. Cliffhanger. Brandon's lawyer pulls him aside, furious. The judge bangs the gavel. Enough. We'll resume Monday with full disclosure. When a dam breaks, it doesn't ask who's standing downstream. The first leak came on a blog called Executor Watch, run by someone with too much time and a keen eye for probate drama. A single post: wealthy son accused of manipulating father's will. Anonymous tape emerges. No names, no sources. But the details were unmistakable. Vanessa forwarded it to me with one line. Here it comes. By noon, it had already made its way to Reddit. By 5, someone posted a photo of Brandon's company badge and cross-referenced the corporate filings. A Twitter thread followed 5 posts long, outlining the family trust structure, the taped confession, and a curious LLC in the Caymans. I didn't write a word of it, but it felt like someone had picked up the torch I'd quietly set down. Brandon's silence was deafening. His Instagram, usually a carousel of wine glasses and smug grins, went dark. No story posts, no dog pictures. Just the last photo from weeks ago, him in a blazer captioned "Legacy is earned." That post started collecting comments. Not nice ones. At 6:43 p.m., I got the first call from an unknown number. I let it ring. Then another. And another. Finally, a voicemail. This is HR from Saxon and Tripp. We'd like to speak with Mr. Brandon Miller regarding internal inquiries and legal representation. I forwarded it to Josh. Vanessa texted me. He's not suspended yet, but he will be. I didn't gloat. Not aloud. I just sat at my desk and watched the live feed of a news station refresh every 30 minutes with new speculation. Sources close to the case say the estate's authenticity is being questioned by multiple parties. No one quoted me. I didn't want credit. I wanted conclusion. By Thursday, Brandon's name was trending regionally, not nationally, but loud enough to echo. A podcast did a 5-minute cold take when heirs behave badly. His LinkedIn account disappeared. Julia, who had once texted daily with links and memes, hadn't messaged me since the hearing. I took that as a gift. The real estate Brandon tried to claim as his frozen pending resolution. Tenants got notice. Bank accounts flagged. A judge's order stamped across his ambition like a warning label: do not proceed. I walked to the coffee shop across from my apartment and ordered the same thing I always did: black, no sugar. The barista handed it to me like nothing had changed. And maybe that's what felt strangest. For once, I didn't have to beg anyone to see what I saw. They were seeing it themselves. No shouting required. That evening, while checking an old college alumni page, I found a private message. It was from a guy I hadn't spoken to since my second year, Jonas something. We weren't close, but I remembered he used to study quietly in the corner and always paid attention when no one else did. His message was short. You were right about him. We all saw it. I stared at it longer than I should have, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. I guess part of me had started believing the silence was proof that no one ever noticed. Brandon's world didn't implode in fire. It just crumbled paper by paper, post by post. I heard from someone who knew someone that his office gave him a week to respond, that he walked out with his head high but his hands shaking, that he still told people it was all family drama blown out of proportion. Denial was the last thing he owned, and even that was slipping. The final image came late after dinner, after the dishes, after I'd turned my phone over 3 times thinking I'd finally get some sleep. But then I heard the anchor's voice in the living room, Vanessa's TV buzzing low. Brandon Miller, seen here entering the courthouse today, declined to comment on the allegations involving estate fraud and obstruction. I turned to the screen. There he was. Coat on, head down. Surrounded by microphones and cameras, not saying a word. Cliffhanger. Brandon's face is on the evening news, silent, walking into a courthouse surrounded by press. Victory isn't a parade. It's a quiet breath in a room no one can enter but you. The sunlight that spilled into the apartment was soft, almost apologetic, like it knew what had happened here before I did. I hadn't unpacked everything yet, just the essentials: a mattress, a coffee maker, and a single desk pushed against the window. On it, a folder thick with final court paperwork. The stamp across the top said everything that needed saying: executor reinstated. I read it once. Then again. And then, I didn't read it at all. I just held it, like holding the truth made it more real. The apartment smelled of cedar and new paint. No one else had touched the walls before me. No one had dragged memories through the hallway or spoken words meant to wound, but disguised as love. This place finally was mine. Josh had called that morning. "Congrats," he said. "It's all processed. Clean transfer. The house, the assets, the account. It's yours to decide now." His voice was steady, like he'd been doing this for decades, but I could hear the satisfaction tucked behind his tone. "Thanks," I said. "Now get some sleep." And Ethan. "Yeah, you did good. That was all." He hung up. No speeches, no legalese. Just that. I turned back to the envelope Julia had sent days earlier. It sat unopened on the edge of the desk for a while. I wasn't sure I wanted to see her handwriting. When I finally slit the seal, the paper inside was shaky, like it had been folded too many times by restless hands. "I'm sorry," it began. She went on about the pressure, about how she believed Brandon because it was easier, about how Mom had never questioned him so she didn't either, how guilt isn't a thunderclap, but a slow tightening in the chest you only notice when it's too late. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote. "But I wanted you to know I'm trying to unlearn what I let happen." I read it twice. Didn't respond. But I didn't throw it away either. Vanessa stopped by later with 2 coffee cups and an invitation scribbled on a napkin: New Year's Eve. "Bring something warm and a story you haven't told anyone yet." She winked as she handed it over. "It's not family," she said, "but it's better than silence." We sat on the floor drinking and not saying much. It was the best kind of company, the kind that doesn't ask you to shrink or explain. Later, when the light shifted and the city's noise softened into distant traffic, I took the old cassette out of the drawer. The one with my father's voice, steady, flawed, real. I walked it down to the car, drove to the cemetery without thinking about the route, and stood over the grave like I'd done once as a boy and once more as a man. I played it one last time, not to remember, but to release. His voice crackled over the small speaker. "If anything happens to me, Ethan has full authority." I closed my eyes. Then I erased it. Not because I didn't need it anymore, but because I finally believed it. On the way back, I didn't take the main road. I let the city fold around me in turns and traffic lights, watching strangers cross intersections with coffee in one hand and phones in the other. People were busy building their own lives, not trying to salvage ones someone else broke. Back at the apartment, I set down my keys, poured some water, and leaned against the window. I didn't need a headline. I didn't need their explanations. As I walked away, I realized I wasn't proving them wrong anymore. I was proving me right. I didn't send them a letter. I sent them silence. The cabin smelled like cinnamon and roasted rosemary, Pine logs snapped in the fireplace behind me as someone clinked a mug against the counter. Outside, the lake wore a veil of fog, and the snow had started again light and slow, like it had nowhere urgent to be. Vanessa was humming off-key to a Christmas playlist someone had stitched together from jazz and old vinyl rips. Josh was burning the bacon again. And I was doing nothing in particular, which might have been the biggest shift of all. A year ago today, I was sitting in a car outside my own childhood home, heart pounding from the sound of my mother's voice. Now I stirred a pot of stew and didn't care if anyone approved of the seasoning. There were no performance reviews here, no judgment disguised as tradition. Just people who showed up because they wanted to, not because a last name dictated it. I hadn't answered a single call from my mother since the court's final ruling. She'd tried 3 times twice before the hearing, once after the news hit the family circuit. I didn't block her. I didn't reply either. Letting someone yell into silence is louder than shouting back. At the long wood table worn smooth from years of weather and sanding, Vanessa stood up and raised her glass. She didn't clear her throat or ask for attention. She just lifted her arm like the moment had waited long enough. "To Ethan," she said. "To the one who always shows up and now knows when not to." Laughter followed. Real, unforced. The kind that came from people who'd earned each other's trust one awkward potluck at a time. I gave a small bow, mock dramatic, then sat back down. The cabin was warm in the way a home becomes warm when no one asks you to be less. Later, after dessert and a failed board game, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee. The snow was brushing the railings in delicate arcs. A kid from the cabin next door wandered up with a plastic sled trailing behind him. "You got a big family?" he asked, watching me stare out across the lake. I paused. "I used to," I said. "Now I just have peace." He nodded like he understood even if he didn't, and ran off again toward a pair of other kids waiting at the top of a slope. I slipped my phone out of my pocket, scrolled to the old family group chat still labeled Home Base, and stared at it for a while. There were no new messages. Not since the fallout. Just digital ghosts pretending to be structure. I pressed and held. Delete. No ceremony. No farewell. Just the absence of need. Inside, someone was calling my name, probably Josh, asking if I remembered how to play piano for a makeshift carol attempt. I didn't, but I'd pretend anyway. That was the beauty of now. I didn't need to be the responsible one, the scapegoat, or the punchline. I could just be present. I stepped outside the snow, brushing my shoulders. The quiet felt earned. The snow didn't fall harder that year, but it felt quieter, like even winter had stepped back to let the truth settle. He didn't slam doors or write dramatic farewells. He simply walked forward and left the wreckage behind. Justice didn't come with applause, it arrived like a signature, silent but irreversible. Because when injustice is met with quiet resolve, the truth eventually speaks for itself. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Sometimes peace doesn't come from being welcomed back, but from never needing to return. If you felt that too, leave a comment, type 1. If you relate, type 2. If you think the story could go further. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more journeys like this.